The bride who wasn't supposed to be. The late afternoon train whistled across the lonely plains of Wyoming, cutting through the silence that hung over the small town of Red Willow. The sound rolled over the flat land, echoing between the distant hills like a call from another world, one Evelyn Parker still wasn't sure she belonged in. She sat by the train window, clutching the worn handle of her small brown suitcase. Her reflection stared back at her, pale face, tired eyes, hair tucked under a faded bonnet. Nothing about her said bride. Nothing about her said chosen. But the letter had been real. She reached into her pocket and unfolded it again, smoothing the creases with trembling fingers. The ink had faded a little, but she could still read every word. She'd memorized them by heart during the long ride west. Miss Evelyn Parker. I am a man of simple means, living alone on a cattle ranch near Red Willow. I seek a wife willing to share in the work and the quiet. I am not looking for perfection, only someone with a kind heart and honest hands. If that is you, then come. Caleb Walker. She'd read that last line 100 times. If that is you, then come. It sounded like a prayer. And maybe it was, because she'd come. Evelyn had spent most of her 27 years inside the gray walls of St. Mary's Shelter House in Missouri. Abandoned at 14, she'd learned to scrub, cook, sew, and live quietly so no one would notice when her heart ached too much. Other women came and went, younger, prettier, chosen by men who sent letters and money for the agency's mail-order brides. She'd helped pack their trunks, press their dresses, and wish them happiness, all while telling herself she was content with her little cot and her patch of sunlight by the window. But when the matron came one morning and handed her a letter addressed to Miss Evelyn Parker, something shifted inside her. The matron had frowned. Strange, child. You weren't on the registry. I don't know why he wrote me, Evelyn stammered. But she knew. Maybe someone had seen her helping the younger women, maybe a kind word had reached the agency, maybe, just maybe, God had remembered her. So she sold her few possessions, bought the cheapest train ticket west, and now she was here. The train slowed with a hiss of steam, and Evelyn's heart pounded. She stood, clutching her case, and stepped down onto the wooden platform. The wind met her first, cool, wild, carrying the scent of sagebrush and dust. The town of Red Willow was small, barely more than a cluster of wooden buildings, a saloon, a blacksmith, a general store, and a white church at the far end. A horse neighed somewhere, and the creak of a sign filled the silence. Her eyes swept the platform. Then she saw him. A tall man leaned against a hitching post near the edge of the platform, a black hat pulled low against the sun. His shirt was rolled up at the sleeves, his arms strong, hands rough with work. His stance was steady, not proud, not nervous, just grounded. He looked like the land itself. Evelyn hesitated, her throat tightening. Could this truly be him? He turned at the sound of her footsteps. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat, the world fell away. His eyes were a deep, steady brown, touched by weariness but not cold. "You Caleb Walker?" she asked softly. He nodded once. "Yes, ma'am." "You Evelyn Parker?" Her fingers clutched her shawl tighter. "I am, though I think there's been some mistake." His brow furrowed slightly. "Mistake?" She swallowed hard, feeling her voice shake. "I'm not the beautiful one you ordered." For a moment, the air between them stilled. He looked at her, really looked, not just at her plain face or worn dress, but deeper, as if he could see the life she'd lived. Then, a slow, quiet smile curved his lips. "You're all I wanted," he said simply. Something inside her broke. Not from pain, but from relief so deep it hurt. Caleb took her suitcase without a word and lifted it onto his wagon. His movements were slow, deliberate, almost gentle, the way a man handled something fragile without meaning to show it. "It's a bit of a ride," he said, helping her up. "Hope you don't mind dust." "I've known worse," she said, almost smiling. The wagon creaked forward, wheels crunching over dry earth. They rode side by side through the open plains, endless grasslands rolling toward the horizon, dotted with cottonwoods and distant cattle. Evelyn stole glances at him when she dared. He wasn't what she'd imagined. His face was rugged, yes, but kind. There were small lines near his eyes, carved by sun and sorrow, and his hands looked like they'd built and buried things. After a long silence, he said, "You came from Missouri?" "Yes." "A long way east. Must have been hard leaving everything." She smiled faintly. "There wasn't much to leave." He glanced at her then, his gaze softening, but he didn't pry. Hours passed as the sun sank behind the hills. When they finally turned down a narrow dirt path, Evelyn saw it, his ranch. A small, weathered house stood at the edge of a golden field. The barn leaned slightly, A windmill spun lazily nearby, and a few cows grazed along the fence. It wasn't grand, but it was peaceful. "This is home," he said, stopping the wagon. She stepped down, brushing her skirts, and looked around. "It's beautiful," she whispered. He chuckled low. "Never heard it called that before." "I have," she said, glancing up at him. "Home is beautiful to anyone who's never had one." For a second, something flickered in his eyes. Understanding. He carried her case inside. The house smelled faintly of pine and smoke. A table stood near the window, a few books on a shelf, and a quilt draped over the sofa. Everything was neat, cared for. "I built this after the fire," Caleb said quietly. "Lost my parents and the old house that winter. Been just me ever since." Evelyn turned, meeting his gaze. "I'm sorry." He nodded once. "You don't have to be. The land keeps a man busy enough not to think too much." She smiled softly. "Maybe it's time you let someone help with the thinking." That earned her the smallest of smiles, one that warmed her chest. That night, the sky broke open with rain. The sound drummed gently on the roof as she unpacked her few things, a folded ribbon, a small Bible, and a tin cross she'd kept since childhood. She placed it by the window, whispering a prayer. When she came downstairs, Caleb was sitting by the fire, boots off, a cup of coffee in his hands. He looked up as she approached. "You hungry?" he asked. "A little." He gestured toward a loaf of bread and stew on the table. "Ain't much, but it's warm." They ate quietly, listening to the storm outside. The silence wasn't awkward, it was gentle, like the hush after a hymn. "Why did you choose me?" she asked finally, unable to hold the question any longer. He looked at her over the rim of his cup. "Didn't choose you for looks, if that's what you're wondering." She flushed, glancing down. "I figured that much." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "When the agency wrote me, I told them I didn't want someone fancy. Just a woman who knew what hard work was. They sent me your letter, said you'd help take care of others. That told me all I needed to know." Evelyn blinked. "They sent my letter?" He nodded. "Said you weren't on their list. That you just helped folks. That you stayed even when you could have left. I figured a woman who stays like that's worth more than all the pretty faces they could send." Her eyes burned, but she forced a small smile. "Then I guess you got what you ordered after all." He shook his head. "No. Got something better." Later, as she lay in the small room he'd prepared for her, clean sheets, a lamp, a single rose in a jar, Evelyn listened to the rain. She could hear him moving downstairs, putting logs on the fire, humming softly under his breath. She turned her face into the pillow and let silent tears fall. Not of sadness, but of gratitude. Maybe she wasn't beautiful. Maybe she wasn't the one he was supposed to get. But as the storm softened into a lullaby and the scent of rain drifted through the window, she realized something. She'd never been meant for anyone else's story. Only this one. Only his. The smile that changed everything. Morning sunlight poured through the window, touching the quilt at the end of Evelyn's bed. She opened her eyes slowly, blinking against the light. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The sound of birds outside, the faint smell of coffee, it all felt like a dream. Then she remembered, the train, the dusty road, the man with the kind eyes. Caleb Walker. She sat up, running her fingers through her hair. The room was small but tidy, wooden floors, a chest at the foot of the bed, and a single window overlooking the golden prairie. She had slept soundly, something she hadn't done in years. When she stepped into the kitchen, Caleb was already there, pouring coffee into 2 tin mugs. The morning light caught the rough edges of his face, softening them. "Morning," he said without turning. "Morning," she replied, folding her hands nervously. "I hope I didn't sleep too late." He glanced over his shoulder with a small smile. "It's barely sunrise." "You're fine." She hesitated, then asked, "Can I help with breakfast?" "Only if you want to." He nodded toward the skillet. "Eggs and biscuits. You cook." "I can try." Caleb leaned against the counter, watching as she tied her apron and began to move about the kitchen. Her hands trembled at first. This wasn't the shelter kitchen where she used to cook for dozens of women, this was his kitchen. But the motions came back to her, the rhythm of mixing, the patience of waiting. Soon, the air filled with the smell of baking biscuits. "Smells good," Caleb said, sliding a plate toward her. She smiled shyly. "Not too burnt. Just right." They ate together at the small wooden table. The silence between them was comfortable now. She noticed how he bowed his head briefly before eating, and she did the same. After breakfast, Caleb grabbed his hat. "I'll be fixing the fence line today, near the creek. If you need anything, holler. There's a mare in the stable, gentle one. You can brush her if you like." "I'd like that," she said softly. He nodded, a flicker of warmth in his eyes, then stepped outside. Hours later, Evelyn found herself standing in the stable, sunlight filtering through the slats. The mare, a chestnut beauty named Daisy, nickered softly as Evelyn approached with a brush. "Hey there, girl," she murmured, running her hand down the horse's neck. "Guess we're both new here, huh?" As she brushed, her mind wandered. She thought of the other women back at the shelter, all those who'd left for new lives. She wondered if any of them had found happiness. For the first time, she felt like she might. By noon, she'd cleaned the stable, gathered eggs, and even stitched a small tear in the curtain by the front window. The work felt good, not because someone told her to do it, but because she wanted to. When Caleb returned, his shirt damp with sweat, he found her kneeling by the garden, hands covered in soil. "You been busy," he said, wiping his brow. Evelyn looked up, smiling. "Couldn't just sit around." He chuckled. "Ain't many women who'd call that a hobby." She stood, brushing her skirts. "I suppose I'm not like many women." Caleb looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable in his eyes. "No," he said quietly. "You're not." Days turned into weeks. Life on the ranch fell into a steady rhythm. Evelyn cooked and cleaned, mended shirts and learned how to milk the cow. Caleb taught her to ride, to throw feed, even to mend a bit of fence. He was patient, never harsh, though his silence sometimes carried a weight she couldn't name. He never talked about the fire that took his parents. Never about what came before. But when she asked small questions, about the land, about his childhood, he'd answer softly, as if letting her into a place few had ever been. One evening, they sat together on the porch. The sky blazed orange and pink, the wind whispering through the tall grass. Evelyn had just finished hemming one of his shirts. "Looks better than new," Caleb said. She laughed lightly. "I've had practice. Shelter girls wore hand-me-downs until they were just threads." His jaw tightened slightly. "You must have had it hard there." "It wasn't all bad," she said. "Some kindness lives even in cold places." He looked at her then, a slow smile forming. "You talk like a poet." "I talk like a woman who's seen too much." He didn't argue. "Instead," he said softly, "then maybe it's time you see something better." She felt her chest tighten, warmth blooming under her ribs. That night, a storm rolled in, fierce and loud. Thunder shook the windows as lightning streaked across the plains. Evelyn couldn't sleep. Memories of dark nights at the shelter flooded back, rain dripping through cracks, the sound of women crying. She lit a small lamp and crept downstairs. Caleb was sitting by the hearth, boots off, reading an old Bible. He looked up as she appeared in the doorway. "Couldn't sleep." She shook her head. "Storms make me uneasy." He nodded toward the chair across from him. "Come sit." She did, curling her legs beneath her. The firelight flickered across his face, revealing the faint scar near his temple. "Got that from a wild horse," he said when he caught her looking. "Taught me to respect what I can't control." "People are like that too," she said quietly. "Can't control them either." He smiled faintly. "That true of you?" "Sometimes," she whispered. "But I think I'd rather be trusted than controlled." His eyes softened. "You're not a woman a man could ever control, Evelyn." "Is that a bad thing?" He shook his head slowly. "It's the best thing." The room fell silent except for the crackle of the fire and the soft drum of rain. After a long while, she said, "You've been kind to me, Caleb. Kinder than most would have been." "You make it easy," he replied. "You work hard. You care about things. That means more than you know." Her throat tightened. Most men only see what's on the outside. Caleb leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Then they're fools. You've got something most folks spend their lives looking for, gentleness that don't break." Tears welled in her eyes before she could stop them. She turned away, embarrassed. He stood, hesitated, then reached out, his calloused fingers barely brushing her shoulder. "Evelyn," he said softly, "you don't have to hide when you cry." "Not here." She looked up, eyes shining in the lamplight. "Why are you being so good to me?" He smiled, that same quiet, unguarded smile that had greeted her on the platform weeks ago. "Because you're good to me. Maybe that's all there is to it." The next morning, the storm had passed. The sky was clear again, the earth glistening. Evelyn stepped outside and breathed deeply, the air fresh and new. Caleb was already by the corral, fixing a broken gate. She walked over, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "Thought you could use this," she said. He took the mug, nodding his thanks. Their fingers brushed, and for a heartbeat, neither moved. Finally, he said, "You ever think about leaving Missouri for good?" She laughed softly. "I think I already did." He looked up, his gaze steady. "I mean leaving it in your heart, not just your body." Her smile faded a little. "I'm trying." "You're doing more than that," he said gently. "You're living again." The words sank deep into her, like sunlight breaking through years of cloud. As spring turned to summer, something wordless grew between them. Not a romance of grand gestures or stolen kisses, but something quieter, built through shared work, shared silence, shared trust. He'd come home from the fields, and she'd have supper ready. She'd hum softly as she mended clothes, and he'd watch her with that same steady gaze. One evening, as they walked the fence-line together, Caleb stopped suddenly. "Evelyn," he said, voice rough, "I need to tell you something." She turned to him, heart pounding. "What is it?" He took off his hat, running a hand through his hair. "When I wrote to that agency, I didn't think anyone would come. I wasn't sure I even deserved it." "You deserve kindness," she said softly. He met her eyes then. "I didn't know what I was missing till you stepped off that train." The wind moved through the grass, the last light of sunset brushing his face. "I thought I wanted someone beautiful," he continued. "But turns out, I didn't know what beauty meant." Evelyn's breath caught. He took a small step closer. "It's not in faces or dresses or fancy words. It's in the way you care. The way you make this house feel alive again." Her hands trembled at her sides. "Caleb." He smiled faintly, that same shy curve of lips that first melted her fear. "You're not the beautiful one I ordered," he whispered, "but you're the only one my heart ever needed." Tears spilled freely down her cheeks. She didn't speak, couldn't. She just looked at him, every word she wanted to say burning behind her eyes. Caleb reached out, his thumb brushing away a tear. His touch was gentle, reverent, as though she were something precious. And then he kissed her. It wasn't a grand, sweeping kiss like the ones in storybooks. It was soft, hesitant, the kind of kiss that felt like a promise. A beginning. When they finally pulled apart, Evelyn smiled through her tears. "So what happens now?" He chuckled low, resting his forehead against hers. "Now we build. One day at a time." She nodded, her heart full. "Then let's start." From that day on, the ranch changed. The porch bloomed with wildflowers she planted. The rooms filled with warmth, laughter, and light. Caleb fixed the old swing by the oak tree, and sometimes, after supper, they'd sit there together, her head on his shoulder, his hand resting over hers. Neighbors began to visit more, drawn by the laughter that seemed to drift from the Walker ranch. They called her Mrs. Walker, and she never corrected them. Caleb never did either. And when autumn came, the air crisp, the sky turning gold, he took her hand one evening and said simply, "Evelyn Walker sounds just right to me." Her answer was a whisper against his chest. "It does to me too."